during our fabulous lunch break. I had people challenging me to stay awake during the afternoon sermon. I thought that was y'all's problem, but maybe I was eating more than I realized and people was getting suspect. In this morning's study, I taught things that challenge long cherished traditional views. I know that because I long cherished some of those traditional views. And we're committed to doing what the Bible says. We're committed to, if I can see where I need to tweak my thinking on something, I'm going to do that. And I do not want you to change your thinking on anything just because I said it. I want you to study it and look at the scriptural evidence that we talk about and think about that and look for what the Bible says. And, you know, obviously I hope to be able to impact people's thinking or I wouldn't teach. That's the whole point of teaching, whatever the topic is. But I want to really make clear the thought that I recognize that some of these questions are tricky and have been wrestled around and talked about by a lot of folks for a lot of years. And that's good that we're having those discussions. And I hope that we'll continue to have those discussions in the high-tone way that we've conducted them. Thinking about the case of Peter as revealed in the New Testament is one thing that really opened my mind up to the need to make sure about what I believe about elder qualifications. Acts 14:23, Paul and Barnabas, at the end of their first missionary journey, says, when they had appointed elders in every church and prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. These guys were going around and every congregation was getting elders. And when I first went into the work full time back in the 80s, one of the things that the generation of evangelists older than me that was helping train my generation of guys really emphasized was we had a lot of churches without elders. We need to fix that. We need to work on that. And so it's an obvious question to ask, what's wrong? If they're going around putting in elders everywhere and we're struggling with that, something's wrong. Now, part of that problem may be that they had a level of devotion that was lacking in some of our families, and that, maybe that's true. Maybe part of the problem was the way we've looked at the qualifications. Let's be willing to consider that. Now, as you follow their work in the book of Acts, you find them going into communities, and Paul, as his manner was, went to the synagogue. That's where they went first. And any of those Jews that came to Christ, you're bringing people into the church that were already accustomed to living the kind of life we believe you ought to live in terms of just day-to-day morals and family ethics and family structure. Now, yes, Jesus is the Messiah we've been looking for. Yes, we're changing, some things about the mechanics of how we worship. But you've got an automatic plug into the church of people that had experience of what it means to walk with the Lord, so to speak. So that's going to help if you're going to circle back through and say, okay, do we have anybody that's qualified? You're automatically, if you've got very many Jewish families, you're automatically going to have some men that are going to be close in a lot of ways. So when we turn that over into today, okay, maybe we face some challenges they didn't face. Maybe that's part of it. But one day I was studying the qualifications of elders. I was looking at a particular area where we were working, and I was thinking about my coworker and I and the discussions we were having about who did or didn't meet the qualifications. And this thought crossed my mind because there were some names I was like, boy, I don't know. I'm not sure that's a good idea. It's what we're supposed to do. And then it just hit me. What if I was working in a place and a guy came up for consideration and his story was basically Peter's story? And I thought, I would vote no 10 ways to Sunday. I would say to make this guy an elder is pure unbridled lunacy. We cannot do this, fellows. Just being honest with myself, that's what I said. And there was a reason that I felt that way. Because I had a flaw in my thinking. And I'm going to do the embarrassing thing of walking you through my views when I first went into preaching back in the 80s. And I'm going to center on the having faithful children. We talked about that this morning. You know my understanding of the scriptures there. You may think that's wrong. I wouldn't blame you. I used to think that was wrong. The text says, having faithful children not accused of riot or unruly, or one that rules well his own household, having his children in subjection with all gravity. That's what the text says. Here's where I started. Having baptized children not accused of being unfaithful. That's what I really thought that passage said. That's not what it says, but that's what I thought it said. One that has convinced all his kids to be baptized. That's what I thought that said. In 1 Timothy 3. That's not what it says, but that's what I thought it said. That's where I started, y'all. And you know how it is. Any good mower, once you get it started, wait till it gets warmed up. That's when it'll really cut some grass. Okay? So here's where I wound up. As I thought my way through what it means to be faithful, having faithful children, having baptized children that are grown so we'll know for sure they're going to stay faithful. That's what I believed. I was wrong. That's not what the text says, but that's what I thought. Well, if the kids are still at home, you really don't know if they're faithful, because once they're grown, they may. And it never crossed my mind that in the text he's talking about kids that are still at home. That didn't dawn on me. One that has convinced all his kids to be baptized and marry good people and be good parents. Because Mike and I were raised in a household where our parents emphasized parenting heavily. So in my head, being a faithful kid meant growing up and being a good dad. So if an elder's kids aren't good parents, then they're not faithful. That's how I was thinking. I'm not faulting my parents for this. Trust me, I'm dumb enough to have done this all on my own. And this is what I did with it. And then I looked at Peter and said, nope. And there's a reason. Because I took the qualification and made more out of it than what God ever did. And I did that while believing and still believing God does not need my help writing legislation. So I'm committed to trying to not make rules where God hasn't made rules. And I'm not always going to get that right, and you're not always going to get that right. But we share that goal. So let's talk about that goal as it relates to the qualifications and look specifically at the question of Peter. 1 Peter 5:1, the elders who are among you I exhort, who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. Peter was a fellow elder. He served as an elder apparently at the church at Jerusalem, and then, if church history is correct, and he later relocated, which apparently it is, it seems like he was at Rome, because I think it's in 1 Peter, he talks about Babylon, probably a symbolic name for Rome there. And so he probably moved on, but somewhere he served as an elder. So if I'm sitting here saying, well, I wouldn't have appointed that guy, I'd have said it's crazy, we can't appoint that guy, and then he's an elder in the scriptures, then there's something wrong with how I'm looking at it. You ever notice on the seashore after Christ's resurrection when Peter's like, rain on it, I'm going to go back to fishing for a living. Okay, I know he didn't literally say rain on it. That's the way we talked in Stevens County. I'm done. And Jesus comes and finds Peter and the boys, and he talks to them. And he's talking to Peter about his love for the Lord. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And he said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said, tend my sheep. That word that's translated tend is the verb form for shepherd, pastor, elder. That's verb form of the same word Peter used in 1 Peter 5 when he described the work he shared as an elder. So looking at this sounds to me like Jesus is saying, I want you to be an elder in the church. So here I am admitting to myself that I would vote no on making Peter an elder, and Jesus, knowing way better than I do the hot mess that Peter was, said, I need you to be an elder. So now I don't have a choice. I've got to overhaul how I'm looking at this. Exactly when did Peter become an elder? Well, I don't know of a place that specifically says. In some of our private discussions, some of us have pondered the Acts 6 setting because there you find him and the other apostles kind of having some authority there in the church. And the text just doesn't really tell us if they were acting, in an apostolic authority there, if they had become elders by that time. It's just, we're left to speculate. But I know that by Acts 11 and 30, that they sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. That's at the church at Jerusalem. So that's the first mention of Jerusalem having elders, and apparently Peter was one of them. That's fairly early in the timeline of New Testament history. It's later confirmed. Acts 15, verse 2, verse 4, verse 6. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. It's all about the Judaizer deal of binding Moses' law and circumcision. So when they come to Jerusalem, they were received by the church and the apostles and elders, and they reported all things that God had done with them. And then in verse 6, the apostles and elders came together to consider this matter. So here you've got language that sort of makes you think that the apostles and the elders were the same guys. Well, whatever you do with that, it's obvious that Peter was one of them because he said, I'm an elder. And then later on in this chapter, he's kind of one of the vocal people there about Gentile salvation. Was he qualified? Well, let's look him over. He craved recognition. Luke 9 and 46, then arose a dispute among them as to which of them would be greatest. Yes, Peter was a part of that childish bickering. Can you imagine if Mike and Matt and Larry got together and argued about which one was the greatest? I cannot conceive of any of them having that argument. I can see them all saying, well, you guys are ahead of me. I really feel that way. Don't you feel that way? I mean, how messed up was this? And this wasn't the only time this argument broke out. I cannot fathom how Jesus didn't just turn around and say, really? Again? Do you guys not get it yet? I mean, this is kind of elemental. None of us stand around and argue about who's the greatest. That is so spiritually childish and obviously, come on. Peter did it with the other guys. A bishop must not be self-willed. Was Peter being a little self-willed when he insisted that he be recognized as the greatest? I mean, we've got a little hair in the butter here, y'all. If y'all have never made homemade butter, you may not understand that. Peter was impulsive. On the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up there, and you got to love Peter. He says what the rest of us are thinking. Rabbi, it's good for us to be here, and let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah, because he did not know what to say, for they were great. So, I don't have a clue what to say. Let's hit the big fat red button and say everything that's crossing our mind. That's Peter. We love to talk about him because we all identify with that part of him, quite frankly. Boom, shoot from the hip, boom, you know. An elder is to have self-control in Titus 1 and verse 8. Peter was out of control there. He was not exhibiting self-control. Let's keep going. while we're in the nitpicking mood. Peter was boastful. He told Jesus, even if all are made to stumble, yet I will not be. Who here is going to say that? If one of our elders got up and gave a warning that there's this, new set of ideas coming through the country and it's grabbing people by the heart, and they warned us all with great sobriety that we be mindful that, we not fall prey to this sort of thing, and who is going to stand up and say, well, even if everybody else leaves the church, I'll be the last man standing? None of us are going to say that. Peter did. 1 Timothy 3 and 2 said he's got to be of good behavior. I mean, you could pick a different qualification to talk about, but I guess that one sort of fits here. Insisting to Jesus that, no, I'm not going to have a problem, even though my buddies probably will. We talked about not being a striker, not being violent. Peter is the one that drew the sword. Having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. If we were considering a guy for the eldership and 4 years ago he had cut a guy's ear off, what would you say? Not violent, 1 Timothy 3 and 3 says. I'm just showing you what I studied when I come up with this question and started questioning how I'm looking. I'm just walking you through what I walked through. I'm not asserting anything from any of this yet. I'm just walking you through what I walked through in the privacy of my study. He denied Jesus. This is kind of the first one I thought of. He denied that he knew him. He denied it again, Mark 14, that he began to curse. I do not know this man. So he denied twice, and the third time he put a cherry on top of that and said he started cussing like a sailor. I don't know this man. And now he's up for consideration for the eldership on the seaside. How would you vote? He got better, but he still messed up. Later on in Galatians 2, Paul talks about a controversial period there when he said in verse 11 through 13, Peter had come to Antioch. I withstood him to his face because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision. And the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. Now there's a little bit of a question of the timing on this. There are those that think this may have followed Acts 11. I call that the reckless church-destroying heresy. It's a joke. Then there are those who agree with me this was after the Acts 15. Honestly, it doesn't really matter where you place it in terms of the current discussion. Peter was an elder by Acts 11, and here we are either after then or Acts 15, and he's getting caught up with not hanging out with Gentile Christians just because Jewish Christians weren't too keen on that. He's caught up with the peer pressure. It's the same root problem that led him to deny Jesus. It was peer pressure. What's the answer to all of this? So I'll walk through all these things that he did that would make us question whether or not he's qualified. What's the answer? Am I supposed to look at all of this and say, well, the qualifications are just a loose set of general suggestions. Don't get too caught up in the particulars. 1 Timothy 3 and 2 said a bishop then must be. And then he proceeded to list these qualities. These are not options. These are things that a person must be. So in my mind, it is not biblically sound for me to approach Peter's story and conclude from that. I guess the qualifications just don't really matter that much after all. They're just loose, generic suggestions. Well, then what am I going to do? Well, number one, people can change. People can change. In John 20, In verse 19, the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled, for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in the midst and said to them, peace be with you. This is after the resurrection of Jesus, but before Peter and the others began preaching on the day of Pentecost. And they weren't out boldly proclaiming Jesus as the Son of God and y'all crucified the Messiah. They were hiding, and Peter was one of them. But in Acts 2, he wasn't hiding. He stood up in front of a thronged multitude of the people that he had been hiding from and said, y'all murdered the Son of God. He found his courage, didn't he? In Acts 8, his words of condemnation were very bold, even to the Jewish leaders, to the very people that he was hiding from in fear weeks earlier. Now he's getting up and telling them how the cow ate the cabbage, so to speak. He found his courage. Peter was a different man. Sometimes changes take time, and sometimes changes happen amazingly quickly. And this is over a period of a few weeks. And for me, the pivot point between when he was afraid and when he was bold was that talk Jesus had with him on the seashore in John 21, where he challenged his love. When Peter understood the depth of love's commitment, he became willing to die for Jesus, and not until then. Because Jesus talked to him about that on the seashore. The day is going to come, it's going to cost you everything. And once Peter embraced that, then he could break out of his cage of fear and doubt and hiding and get out there and boldly proclaim. You could keep going with his story into Acts 3, 4, and 5. He wound up in jail. He thought, rightly so, they were about to have him put to death, and an angel opened the prison door for him, and he went and found disciples meeting at Mary's house. Well, that was later on. That was later on in Acts 12, and they're praying for courage and strength. In Acts 4, when the disciples got together, they prayed for courage and strength to boldly speak the word. He was a changed man. Now let's personalize it. When Mike gets back from his trip, ask him, how changed are you from the year before they made you an elder? I know him. I'll tell you, he's a changed man. Ask Matt, ask Larry. Before you were an elder, a year before, 5 years before, 6 weeks before, from the time they made you an elder to today, how much have you changed? How much have you grown? I don't doubt that at all. People can change, and that's part of what relieves the tension on the Peter story is, okay, yeah, he made a lot of mistakes during the ministry of Christ, but on some of that stuff, he changed. He outgrew those problems. Part of the issue is the relative nature of the terminology that's used. A bishop's got to be blameless. Well, let me throw a question at you. Was Jesus blameless? Well, of course he was blameless. Was there anybody out there that would blame him and tell that he was a terrible person? Yes. Well, then how is it that we can conclude he's blameless? We read it this morning. Philippians 2 tells all Christians to be blameless and harmless in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. This is an example of relative terminology. A bishop has to be blameless relative to the world he lives in. It's not that there's somebody here that's so perfect that you never blame them for anything. If he's married, he's getting blamed for stuff, y'all. You guys didn't even have the guts to say amen. Come on now. I know it's true. You could say anybody could be blamed to some degree, but when he says a bishop must be blameless, he's obviously talking about, comparatively speaking, he's an above-the-board kind of a guy. And when I take that concept, that doesn't mean I'm going to drop the qualifications and say they don't matter, but it also means I'm not going to look at them with such a strictness that in Acts 14, when they went from place to place and ordained elders, I would say, no, they couldn't have done that. The qualifications are too hard to meet. I mean, I've known brethren that have said those qualifications are so hard, it's impossible for any Christian to ever meet them. How does that work when Paul and Barnabas and the boys went around ordaining elders everywhere? There's something wrong in our thinking, and part of that needs to be a willingness to see we're talking about a relative terminology within the framework of understood humanity. Part of this is a matter of perspective. 1 Timothy 3 said he's got to have a good testimony among those that are outside. He's got to have a good reputation. I think I've got a good reputation in the community. I think I have a good reputation in Lubbock among the people that I do business with there. We still have business we conduct out there, I think. If I gave you a few names here, call these people, I think they would tell you, yeah, he's a stand-up guy. He's all right. I think I could find some people that would tell you I was a big pain in the neck. And they didn't like me. And I think I could find that about you too. So what about an elder's reputation? Well, it's obviously a matter of perspective. What did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Plain in Luke 6? Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. So one passage says you've got to have a good reputation. The other passage says, woe to you if you've got a good reputation. How do we make sense out of that? Well, the resolution, I think, is probably pretty obvious to you. If there are people out there who make every decision in life based on flawed ethics, I don't want them to think well of me. If there's someone out there that is just an average person with at least decent ethics, then I'm interested in my reputation with them. And so when it comes to an elder having a good testimony outside, we're looking at it from the perspective of what do decent people say about this man? Not what does the most hardened criminal say about him, but what do decent people say about this man? Something else I think we need to understand is we're not looking for perfection in each one of these areas. What did Paul tell Timothy about elders in 1 Timothy 5 and 20? Those who are sinning rebuke in the presence of all, that the rest may also fear. Peter had a problem yielding to peer pressure. That led him to deny Jesus before the crucifixion, didn't it? He grew, he got better, but he still had a vulnerability there. Because later on, when all these Jewish Christians won't have anything to do with Gentile Christians, he kind of fell in with that. He gave in to peer pressure. And Paul had to correct him. And when he corrected him, Peter, fixed it. We're not looking for people that are perfect in these areas because that person doesn't exist. And apparently the workers in the early church understood this because they went places and were able to find men that met the qualifications. So I need to understand we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for people who, in general, meet these criteria, understanding they may have a weakness. They're not going to be perfect in all of these areas, but do they generally represent strength and quality in these areas? Paul had spent between 2.5 and 3 years working at Ephesus. I've got the references on the screen for you. We find them having elders after he left, so apparently Paul had something to do with the church there appointing elders. Think about that for a minute. Paul left Ephesus, end of Acts 19. He makes a loop back out, and he comes back through, and he lands on the shorelines of what was then Asia Minor, and he calls for the Ephesian elders to come down there to the coast and meet him and have a talk. He was thorough in his work. During that talk in Acts 20, he said, guys, I have not kept back anything from you. I've taught you publicly and from house to house. He was thorough. He talked about warnings he gave them night and day with tears. He was thorough. And he told them in Acts 20 and verse 30, also from among yourselves men will rise up, speaking perverse things to draw away disciples after themselves. So these men that Paul had a hand in selecting and appointing, these men that Paul had been thorough working with, imagine Paul, the moment the Spirit revealed to him, you know, some of those guys are going to break ranks, don't you? You know, some of them are going to rise up speaking perverse things, and they're going to try to split the church. Yeah, those guys you appointed as elders. You know, there was a time that I endorsed a man to serve in the church office, and it backfired. I had been thorough. I spent hours with the guy. We worked together in church work. We made visits. We did Bible studies. I spent time in his home. I put my feet under his table. He put his feet under mine. We spent a lot of time working together. And the time came where I could see this is about to go south. I felt sick as a dog. What did I miss in my scrutiny? What did I overlook? What telling clue did I not see? That's what you do. And then one day I woke up and read Acts 20 and verse 30. Peter told these men to shepherd the flock that the Holy Spirit had made them overseers of. Paul wasn't just involved in this selection process. The Holy Spirit was involved by virtue of Paul acting on the authority of what the Spirit taught. Jesus selected 12 disciples, and one of them went south. Sometimes people change for the worse, and sometimes they disappoint you. Peter could have gone either way. We do the best we can to look at qualifications honestly and sincerely. We do not discard and disregard. They are there for a reason. The text says the men must be these things. We're looking for those qualities to genuinely abound within that individual, but we're not looking with such a level of strictness that makes it impossible. So man's got to have control of his temper. Does that mean that he's never been mad a day in his life? Or does that mean he has a pretty good handle on it? Does that mean he hadn't been mad in 5 years? Or does that mean when he does get mad, he doesn't start throwing furniture? You see what I'm getting at? We're looking at relative terms. And so we're looking for people that genuinely meet these qualities. They matter. The Spirit put them there. That is our criteria. We don't have a right to discard them as just general suggestions. But we also approach them with discernment and understanding, recognizing people can change. People can grow. And some of these things are relative. And some of them are to be understood with a sense of perspective. Was Peter qualified? Apparently he was. The Lord wanted him to serve as an elder. But Peter wasn't perfect. And I'm going to tell you, we ran out of perfect people a long time ago. We've got to find men to serve as elders and serve as deacons for the future of the church that meet the qualities. But let's not approach them as a list of disqualifications. Let's approach them as a list of qualities that someone can meet. Let's think about it that way. I hope that this uncomfortably honest walk through my experiences in trying to do this work, I hope this helps you. I hope that thinking about the Apostle Peter helps you, and I hope it helps us all to make solid decisions in the recommendations that we do and don't make. You look at all these things, and it's obvious that we serve a patient and loving God. Look at the love He's had to put this plan in place to help with the governance of the church and give us leaders that can be there for us, but understanding they're relatable because they're just as human as we are. Let's think about that as a reflection of God's love. And let's think about these arrangements that the Lord has put in place to govern His church as representative of the arrangements by which He would govern our whole life. The Lord wants to govern your life for your good and your benefit. And so if you're not a Christian this afternoon, I hope you'll think about becoming a Christian and bringing your life under the Lord's governance. Because again, that will give you the best life here and the best possible eternity. No comparison to the alternative. So, if you wish to become a Christian this afternoon, of course, we would love to help you. Or if as a Christian, you need the church to pray for you, we stand ready to assist you in that way. If we can help you in either way, please come while we stand and while we sing.